This webinar agenda is a little bit about TextVamp, program highlights, program requirements, available funding and allocations, grant amounts, eligible expenses, submitting a grant application, selection, award, and contracting, disposition, reimbursement, and reporting commitments. We will also review an example application and then conclude with a Q&A. Volkswagen entered into a settlement agreement to resolve violations for vehicles that emitted nitrogen oxide above the federal standards. Volkswagen was required to pay approximately $2.9 billion into the Environmental Mitigation Trust Agreement. An estimated $87 million in grant funds are remaining and will be available for this grant round. The TextVamp 2023 All-Electric Grant Program will open this summer and will be first come, first serve. Funding will be allocated based on priority area and project category. Reimbursement rates are 100% of the project's incremental costs for government entities and 75% of the project's incremental costs for non-government entities. Any remaining funds may be reallocated as necessary. Here is a map and a list of priority areas for TextVamp. The equipment must be operated at least 51% in one or more of these areas. The eligible project category under this grant program include Class 8 local freight trucks and port drayage trucks, Class 4 through 8 school bus, shuttle bus, or transit bus, Class 4 through 7 local freight trucks, airport ground support equipment, forklifts, and port cargo handling equipment. Please note that on-road vehicles and non-road equipment used primarily for competition or recreational purposes are not eligible under this program. Eligible applicants include individuals, state, local governments, corporations, or any other legal entity. It is important for all business entities, such as corporations or partnerships, to have an active registration with the Texas Secretary of State by the program opening date. Additionally, applicants must disclose any known conflict of interest in writing at the time of the application. It's essential to note that this request for grant application, also known as the RFGA, does not apply to entities intending to serve as third party for funding, whereby the grant fund would be passed through to the owners or operators of the vehicle or equipment. To qualify, the on-road vehicle must meet certain specific criteria. First, they must be owned or commercially financed, registered, or operated by the applicant in Texas for at least 2 years immediately preceding the application signature date. Second, the vehicle must have been used in the primary function and the routine operation of the applicant in Texas for at least 2 years preceding the application signature date. Third, the vehicle must have a diesel engine certified to the EPA heavy-duty on-road engine emission standards. Finally, the vehicle must be in operating condition with at least 5 years of useful life remaining. Additional requirements may apply based on the eligible project category. Eligible non-road equipment must meet certain criteria. First, the equipment must be powered by a diesel engine rated at 25 horsepower or greater. Second, it must be owned and operated by an applicant in Texas for at least 2 years preceding the application signature date. Third, the equipment must have been used in the primary function in the routine operation of the applicant in Texas for at least 2 years preceding the application signature date. Last, the equipment must be in operating condition with at least 5 years of useful life remaining. It's important to note that non-road equipment in this grant round does not include marine vessels, locomotives, or stationary engines. To be eligible for replacement, the new on-road vehicle must meet certain criteria. First, it must be certified to emit at least 25% less NOx than the old vehicle. Second, it must have an electric engine, which includes options such as hydrogen fuel cells and battery electric vehicles. Hybrid vehicles are not eligible. Third, the vehicle model year must be no more than 1 year older than when the vehicle was purchased. Last, the new vehicle must serve the same type and intended use as the old vehicle. It's important to note that on-road vehicles must be replaced by another on-road vehicle unless the applicant wishes to replace an on-road vehicle with a non-road purpose-built port drayage truck, also known as a terminal tractor or yard truck. To be eligible for replacement, the new non-road equipment must meet certain criteria. First, it must be certified to emit at least 25% less NOx than the old equipment. Second, it must have an electric engine, including options like hydrogen fuel cells and battery electric vehicles. Third, the engine model year must be no more than 1 year older than the calendar year the engine was purchased. Lastly, the new equipment must serve the same type and intended use as the old equipment. It's important to note that non-road equipment must be replaced by another piece of non-road equipment, unless the applicant wishes to replace a non-road purpose-built port drayage truck with an on-road purpose-built port drayage truck. To repower existing eligible on-road vehicles or non-road equipment with new, rebuilt, or remanufactured engine, the existing vehicle or equipment must have at least 5 years of useful life remaining. The new engine must be certified or verified to emit 25% less NOx than the engine being replaced. Additionally, the replacement engine must be electric, including hydrogen fuel cells and battery electric vehicles. Applicants purchasing on-road vehicles or non-road equipment may request additional funding for refueling infrastructure. Allowable alternative fuels for the infrastructure include electricity and hydrogen. The refueling infrastructure must provide refueling capacity for the grant-funded vehicle or equipment. Applicants may expand existing infrastructure or install new services depending on their needs and circumstances. Ownership or the ability to install, operate, and maintain the infrastructure at the proposed site for the duration of the contract and activity life is required, and the infrastructure must be purchased by the applicant and not leased. At least 51% of the grant-funded vehicle or equipment annual operation must occur in one of the priority areas. The annual operation can be measured in miles traveled, hours on the engine, or fuel consumed. It's important to note that refueling infrastructure must be owned, operated, and maintained by the applicant throughout the contract duration. Generally, projects that generate markable credits under an emissions reduction credit program are not eligible for this grant program unless the reductions are transferred to the state implementation plan or permanently retired. We have a remaining 87 million in funding. Funds will be initially allocated based upon eligible project categories and priority areas. As previously mentioned, after 90 days, depending on the demand, the funding allocation may be redistributed to best meet the purpose of the program. The next two slides will cover the initial allocation by project category and priority area. This slide covers forklifts, port cargo handling equipment, and airport ground support equipment. Predetermined grant award tables will be available on our website when the program opens. Here is our grant table by project category and priority area for Class 8 local freight trucks and port drayage trucks, Class 4 through 7 local freight trucks, Class 4 through 8 school bus, shuttle bus, and transit bus, with a total of an estimated $87 million in grant fund remaining. As previously mentioned, the maximum grant amounts are based on entity type and project category, with government entities being eligible for up to 100% of the incremental project cost and non-government entities being eligible for up to 75% of the incremental project cost. The incremental cost of the proposed project must be reduced by the value of any existing financial incentives or assistance that directly reduces the cost of the proposed project, including tax credits or deductions, other grants, or any other public financial assistance. The specific calculation method depends on the project type, whether it's replacement, repower project, or refueling infrastructure. For replacement projects, TexVent utilizes a default scrap value of $1,000. For repower projects, TechVent utilizes a default scrap value of $250, and for refueling infrastructure, any tax credits or deductions or other grants or other public financial assistance must be subtracted from the purchase and installation cost. Eligible costs for replacements must be paid on or after the program opening date to be considered for funding. Eligible costs for replacement projects include costs of the grant funded or on-road vehicle or non-road equipment, taxes and government fees, delivery and shipping fees, factory extended warranties, maintenance, service contracts, mechanic and safety inspection, manufacturer or dealer processing fees not related to financing. Now let's look at the eligible costs for repower projects. Consider the following expenses as they are eligible under this grant. Cost of a new engine or upgrade, including tax, delivery charges, additional equipment required for installation, associated supplies directly related to the installation process, costs for removing and disposing of the old engine, installation costs including labor fees, re-engineering costs if modifications are needed, other expenses such as shipping, warranties, inspections, and contracts and fees. Eligible costs for refueling infrastructure projects must fall under the following categories. Equipment include tangible personal property with an estimated useful life of over 1 year and per unit acquisition cost of $5,000 or more, including sales, tax, and delivery. This includes equipment with separate essential component parts if the sum of the separate component parts, including tax and delivery, has the original value of $5,000 or more. Supplies and material, non-construction goods and materials having a unit acquisition cost, including sales, tax, and delivery, of less than $5,000 per unit. Eligible costs for refueling infrastructure projects for the enhancement or building of permanent facilities. The construction costs include planning, designing, engineering, materials and labor, subcontracts for services in connection with the construction and facility improvements such as paving, foundations, and covers. For contract services, non-construction related costs for subcontracted or hired out professional services are tasks provided by a firm or individual who is not employed by the applicant. For all project types, there are a number of ineligible costs, which include insurance premiums, finance fees, charges, salaries, travel expenses for employees of the grantee, expenses of any lobbyist registered in Texas, costs associated with the preparation and submission of the application, administrative costs of the grantee, including overhead and indirect costs, any cost paid prior to the program opening date listed on the RFGA, food and drink, costs that do not involve a transaction, such as the use of an existing inventory without proof of purchase or a transaction with a related business affiliate. Transactions between related businesses are not considered arm's length transaction, but indicate that there is a conflict of interest. TCEQ will consider costs between affiliates ineligible unless sufficient documentation is provided demonstrating that the procedures were in place to mitigate any conflict of interest. Grantees should seek approval from TCEQ prior to incurring and paying expenses of this nature. Listed here are the 4 methods of submission for an application. Choose the submission method that most convenient for you. Just make sure to include all required documents. It's important to ensure that the application is complete, including all pages, required attachments, applicant's contact information, required signatures, and all necessary information for TCEQ to review eligibility and award grant funds. If any information is missing, TCEQ may provide an opportunity to submit the missing information within a 3 business day deadline. However, any request to waive ownership or usage requirements must be submitted with the application and not after. Requests to waive ownership or usage requirements will be considered on a case-by-case basis with no assurance that a waiver will be granted. TCEQ staff is available to answer any questions applicants may have while putting their application together. Applicants may also choose to utilize a private consultant. However, this is not required and will not give an applicant more favorable treatment. Please submit only one application per email with a maximum size of 25 megabytes. Anything larger must be uploaded to the FTPS server and shared with bwsettle@tceq.texas.gov. When submitting your application electronically, it's important to organize your attachments by activity and label them clearly with an activity number at the top of each page. It's preferable to submit the application and attachments as a single PDF document. Keep in mind that each application is limited to a maximum of 10 activities. For those of you working on refueling infrastructure projects, remember that each application should focus on one project site and involve a single type of alternative fuel. Following these application submission guidelines will help streamline the process. The required documentation needed is colored photographs of the vehicle and equipment being replaced, which are the front, right side, left side, rear, engine, and engine data plate. Photographs of the vehicle and equipment should include tires or tracks. All photographs must be clear enough to read the pertinent information. For on-road projects, the following documentation is required. A copy of the vehicle title listing the applicant as the owner or lease for the 2 years immediately preceding the application signature date. Registration renewal receipts for the 12 months immediately preceding the application signature date. Registration for operation in several states, including Texas, may be considered as proof of continuous registration and operation in Texas. For all applicants, ensure a completed, signed, and accurate W-9 is also submitted. Let's discuss the documentation required for refueling infrastructure projects. If you're applying for a grant, you'll need to provide 2 important documents. First, include a site plan that demonstrates the planning and design of the proposed facility. This can be a photograph, satellite map, drawing, or similar graphic of the site. It should show how vehicles or equipment will access the facility and indicate its location within the property, including any easements, setback requirements, and property boundaries. Second, you must provide documentation that proves your ability to install, operate, and maintain the refueling infrastructure. This can include property ownership records or legal agreements that show you have the authority to construct on the site. Additionally, you'll need to demonstrate your ability to operate on the property for at least 5 years from the application signing date. These documents are essential to support your application and show your commitment to the project's success. Make sure the documentation clearly supports your ability to meet the construction, operation, and maintenance requirements. Substantially complete application that meet the eligibility criteria will be reviewed and awarded in order they are received for each combination of eligible project category and priority area until the available funding is exhausted. We reserve the right to limit the award of more than 50% of the funding allocation to a single applicant. For the purposes of this limitation, an applicant includes an individual or business and all its associated legal affiliates. Applicants selected to receive grant funding will be required to sign a contract with TCEQ. The approved activities outlined in the application will be included in the contract's scope of work. Grant recipients commit to taking all necessary actions to ensure the successful completion and operation of the new vehicle, equipment, and/or refueling infrastructure within the contract's timeframes and funding limitations. Before reimbursement payment is issued, the old on-road vehicle, non-road equipment, and engines being replaced must be destroyed and rendered permanently inoperable. Acceptable methods of disposition are specified in the RFGA and application form, including crushing the vehicle or equipment, cutting holes in the engine block or frame rails, and for airport ground support equipment only, destruction via professional metal recycler. Alternative methods of disposition may be considered subject to TCEQ's approval. Requests must be submitted at the time of application. Failure to comply with the disposition requirements may result in contract remedies, including termination. Payments will be made on a reimbursement basis for eligible costs paid in full by the grantee minus the scrap value and any incentives. Grantees must provide documentation to show that grant-funded equipment has been received and costs have been paid in full before reimbursement is provided. Final reimbursement requests must be submitted by the deadline specified in the contract. Grantees experiencing project delays may request an extension subject to TCEQ's approval. If a grantee finances the equipment, the reimbursement will be assigned to the financing entity. To be paid directly, the grantee must demonstrate that eligible expenses equal or exceed the reimbursement amount using non-borrowed funds. During the activity life of the grant-funded vehicles or equipment, grantees must own and operate them in Texas, maintain the usage and location records, keep the equipment in proper operating condition, obtain sufficient commercial insurance, and notify TCEQ of any changes or intentional destruction or sale. Grantees are not required to provide annual usage reports, but must maintain records to demonstrate compliance, and random audits may be conducted. Failure to meet these requirements may result in contract remedies, including termination and the return of the grant funds. TCEQ will notify the grantee in writing upon the end of the activity life. Before you begin your application, please make sure you have reviewed the request for grant application, also known as the RFGA, the sample contract, and have the correct application. Thank you for listening to the webinar. Jack Frank will now review the application, and we will conclude with a Q&A.
Good afternoon. What we'll be looking at right now is the application form for Class 4 to 7 local freight trucks. Each of the applications in this TexVimp program are going to follow this structure, so we're just using this as an example. This first page is simply a group of parameters or rules about the application you're looking at. As you can see, it's pretty good to read, especially if this is your first time applying through this program. If you have questions on how to fill out the project application, contact us at this number, 833-215-TXVW, or at the email address vwsettle@tcuq.texas.gov. Project application form should only be completed by applicants seeking to replace or repower Class 4 to 7 local freight trucks, as I said. Infrastructure. Applicants purchasing a qualifying vehicle or piece of equipment under this grant program may request additional funding for on-site refueling infrastructure to fuel one or more of the qualifying vehicles or pieces of equipment. There are some submission limitations. Um, Mainly, applicants are limited to submitting no more than 10 activities in a single application, and TCEQ reserves the right to limit the award of more than 50% of a funding allocation to a single applicant. Um, and then application completeness and application deadline. Again, these are good things to read if this is, especially if this is your first application. All right, moving on to section 1, where you're going to put in your applicant information. Your applicant legal name is the first part, which must match the W-9 form, and that's whether you're applying as an individual or as a corporation, as a business. Whatever you put here has to match what you also include on your W-9 form. Your business information. So you're going to lay out what kind of ownership business type you are, individual, state, local government, corporation, or another legal entity. Federal employee identification number is if you're applying as a business or corporation. A social security number is if you're applying as an individual or sole proprietor. These are just fill out forms right there. All right. The next step is the authorized official, described here as the applicant or an employee who has legal authority to sign for and speak on behalf of the entity. You can have your prefix here. See all the various options. First name, middle name, last name. If you have a suffix, your title at the company or the AO's title, the primary phone number or cell phone number. Some people don't include their cell phone number, but we do need at least one number, and we absolutely require the email address and the mailing address, street and PO box, and the city, state, and zip code. Moving on, we have the designated project representative, who is the applicant or an employee who will serve as the point of contact for this application. The first question is the DPR the same person as the AO? As you can say, yes or no. If the authorized official and designated project representative are the same person, you'll put yes here, and you can just skip to the next area. If the DPR is someone who's different, they will put in the same information they put the AO put in: their prefix, their name, their title at their company, phone number, email address, and actual physical address. Next is the third-party preparer signature page. A third-party preparer is someone other than the applicant or an employee of the applicant who has been pulled in to fill out this application. So if you did use a third-party preparer, you'll hit yes here, and you'll fill out, the third-party preparer will fill out this information on their own. As you can see, we need a signature and a signature date. However, if you are not using a third-party preparer, you'll click no, and you'll just skip on to the next level, to the next section. Section 3 is certification of eligibility to receive a state-funded grant. Every applicant has to complete this section. It certifies eligibility to receive a grant under this program. There are a few additional certifications regarding child support obligations and a notice regarding the Federal Privacy Act, which explains why we require the Social Security number. So the part that the applicant will actually fill out, again, you will have to designate whether you're individual or sole proprietor. If one or more individuals owns 25% or more of the business entity, if no individual owns 25% or more of the business entity, or whether you're a governmental entity. And these are just checkboxes. Now, if you are chosen individual or sole proprietor, or option 2, about only one of the individuals owns, or more than one own 25% of the business entity, you will list the name and the social security number of those particular people here, and there's up to 5. And then by signing this application in section 10 project summary page, you, the applicant, certifies that the individual or business entity named in this application is not ineligible to receive a grant under this section 231.006 of the Texas Family Code. Acknowledges that any contract may be terminated or any payments withheld if the certification is inaccurate. Next section is general certifications. There is nothing to fill out here, but it is listing of specific requirements and statements for funding under this particular grant program. Um, they apply to any contract awarded by TCEQ from this application. We're not going to go through each one of them. Each one of these points here, there's 15 of them, but again, this is very good to read, especially again if this is your first application. And we'll just scroll down here. And that brings us to section 5, program certifications. This is the first section that deals with refueling grant infrastructure. We have some rulings here. So non-road or on-road equipment eligible for grant funding must be certified to emit at least 25% less nitrogen oxides, have an electric engine, have a vehicle model year no more than 1 year older than the calendar year in which the vehicle was purchased, and be of the same type and intended for the same use in the same application or vocation. More of that in a moment. This is the main part where the applicant is actually manipulating the application. We need to talk about site ownership for the refueling infrastructure project certification. Right here is the applicant, the property owner. You choose either yes or no. If yes, you'll move forward to the next section. If no, the property owner must provide their name, title, and signature below. And the property owner will need to fill this out themselves if the applicant does not actually own the property. And then by signing this application, the applicant certifies that it will purchase and own the grant funded equipment during the contract period and throughout the activity life, subject to the following. Any sale of the grant funded equipment during the activity life will be subject to approval and consent to assignment by TCEQ in accordance with the contract terms. Okay. Moving on. This is where we put in a good amount of the main information. This is the vehicle equipment information, section 6. As you can see right here, we have an activity number. Activity number corresponds to, basically you should read it as how many vehicles are we looking to replace or repower. Whether, again, as we said on the first page, you can have up to 10. So each activity would be numbered. And if you have more than one activity, you click here for additional pages. And click there. After you show us how many activities and you create the additional pages, up to 10 activities, you will put the old vehicle and equipment information in here. You have the old vehicle equipment type, the identification number, either the last 4 digits of the VIN number or the entire ID number. Non-road, we need the entire ID number. On-road, last 4 digits of the VIN, the vehicle equipment make, the model year. If you're applying for a placement or repower of an on-road vehicle, you will put the gross vehicle weight rating in this section. Then we move on to the engine, the make, model, and identification and model year of the engine. Right here, if you're doing a non-road piece of equipment, you will put the engine horsepower rating here. So non-road is horsepower here. On-road is GVWR, which goes right here. Fuel type. For this program, the fuel type of the old vehicle must be diesel. The engine family code. Important to notice, the engine family code is a 12-digit emissions code, which is required for engines 2003 and newer. If you are replacing a vehicle that is an engine that is older than 2003, this information is not required. However, if it's post 2003, the engine family code is extremely important for figuring out what the NOx emission rate of the vehicle and engine will be, and thus helps us determine what the requested grant amount, what the maximum grant amount will be. The second section is where we're talking, the applicant is going to be talking about the new vehicle. The new vehicle type, vehicle equipment type and year, the engine year, the fuel type, and this is an electric round, so you only have electricity and hydrogen as fuel type options. And electricity and hydrogen both have 0 as your NOx emissions. So that's a drop down, but there's only one option there. And this is where you will put your requested grant amount. On the TexVimp website, we will have grant tables that adhere to different types of vehicles, and you will pull your requested grant amount according to the vehicle, according to either the GVWR or horsepower and the year of the engine. And you will just type in your requested grant amount here. An important note before we move on is that the new vehicle and the old vehicle must be what we call like for like. You have to be replacing a vehicle. An older vehicle must be replaced by the same type of vehicle. If you're going to get an agricultural tractor or you're trying to replace an agricultural tractor, it needs to be a new agricultural tractor, and so on. Moving on, this is the bulk of the refueling infrastructure section. Again, this is an optional part of the application. Not everyone applies for refueling infrastructure grants along with their vehicle, but if you are going to, this is where you're going to put what fuel type and information for the refueling infrastructure. And it's important to note that the refueling infrastructure fuel must be the same as the fuel you are using for your new vehicle. So again, fuel type for the new vehicle, electricity or hydrogen. Fuel type for refueling infrastructure is either electricity or hydrogen. It has to be, again, like for like. You'll put the charge rate of your refueling infrastructure here, the charge rate unit of measure here, the project location here, the address, zip code, county, city, state. And here you will do a write-in of a brief description of the project details. Usually about 50 words is the max. But you'll need to describe what the intended project is there. And then here is some required documentation. If you're applying for refueling infrastructure, you will need to provide documentation that includes a site plan with the application. It could be a scaled map, which could be a photograph, satellite map, drawing, or similar graphic of the proposed site that shows the planning and design of the proposed facility. Site plan must demonstrate how the vehicle or equipment may access the facility and provide the location of the facility within the property. And you have to include easements, setback requirements, and/or property boundaries. Another thing you would have to include is a demonstration of the applicant's ability to install, operate, and maintain the refueling infrastructure at the proposed site, such as documentation through property ownership records or other legal agreements. And they'll show the following: ability to complete any required construction, ability to operate on the proposed property for at least 5 years from the date that the applicant has signed this particular application. So that's refueling infrastructure. We're moving on to the last section of it. We have a equation here where you can figure out your final grant amount. It's good to read this. Government entities may request up to 100% of the incremental cost of the project. Non-governmental entities may request up to 75% of the incremental cost of the project. So you'll put your equipment total, your supplies and material total, your construction total, your contract services total. All of those together will make your total incremental project costs. The refueling infrastructure grant amount, again, based on whether you're a governmental entity or a non-governmental entity, you'll put the final number in here, either 100 or 75%, depending on whether you are A or B. Moving forward, Section 8 is where we discuss the operation of the grant-funded equipment. Again, you will see the activity number, again, which corresponds to how many different pieces of vehicle or how many different vehicles you're talking about on this application. You'll put the activity number here. Click here for additional pages if you have an additional vehicle or additional activity. The activity unit of measurement will be miles for on-road and will be hours for non-road. This is also important. Is the unit of measurement and the percent of annual operation the same for all activities? If the answer to that is yes, you have multiple activities, but you're operating the same percent in the same priority area, you do not need to add additional activity numbers. If all of your activities are the same, you can just answer this one. Let's say you're operating 100% for 10 activities in the El Paso area. You'll put 100 here. Total percent of operation, 100. And even though you have 10 activities, 10 vehicles, they're all operating in the El Paso area, 100%, you can move on. However, of course, if you are operating in different priority areas and different percentages, that's when you're going to need to click here for the additional pages and add additional activities. Moving on. Section 9 is for disposition of the vehicle, equipment, or engine being replaced. To be understood is basically, how are you going to destroy or render inoperable your old vehicle or equipment? Most applicants select standard destruction, which is complete destruction or otherwise rendering permanently inoperable by crushing the vehicle or equipment and cutting an engine and cutting a 3-inch or larger hole on both sides of the engine block and cutting both frail rames in half. So you'll just click that. If you're doing standard destruction, you can move right on. However, applicants occasionally would like to do alternative destruction, and these alternative destruction applications are considered on a case-by-case basis by the TCEQ review team. We may consider alternative methods of rendering the vehicle equipment engine permanently inoperable in lieu of the standard method of destruction. So you'll click that. If you're doing alternative destruction, you would describe the method of alternative destruction here in this box, just to write in. And then in alternative destruction down here in question 3, does this alternative apply to all vehicles, equipment, and engines listed in the application? Yes or no? If no, list the specific activity numbers or list the specific vehicles for which this alternative destruction process applies. And you would list 1, 3, 5, if that is in case what you're applying for. Moving ahead, we have the project summary page now. This is one of our final pages. Applicant legal name again here. Again, it needs to match the W-9 and what you put on at the very top of the application in section 1. Applicant type, again, we have the 4 categories here. Mailing address, city, state, and zip code. Moving down, a quick run through of the project information, the primary project area, which we saw in section 8. The emission source, which is either going to be on-road or non-road. Your project type, which will either be replacement or repower. Total number of activities in this application, which should match the number in section 6, which is vehicle information. Total eligible cost of project. This is where you would enter the requested grant amount from section 6, your vehicle information. And this particular area is the total requested grant amount. And this is if you are doing refueling infrastructure. This is the total requested grant amount of all activities from section 6, the vehicle information, plus the total infrastructure grant amount from section 7. If you are not doing refueling infrastructure, you obviously wouldn't add anything to your requested grant amount from the vehicle information. But if you are, that final number goes in there. Finally, the authorized official, same person identified as the authorized official in the top of this application, needs to put their printed name, their official title, their signature, and the date of signature here. Moving forward, the one of our section 11 here is the application checklist, which can be very helpful for an applicant to make sure that they have their application with all the sections included and in the right order. This is a quick run through of all the pages we've talked about. We'll talk about section 12 in a moment. There is additionally some required attachments. All applicants will need to include a fully filled out W-9 form with a signature required. Again, the W-9 form legal name needs to match what is listed here in the application as the legal name. If you're applying as an individual or sole proprietor, you will need to provide a image copy of your state or federal ID. If you're applying for on-road vehicle replacement, we will need both a copy of the registration documents for vehicles and a copy of the title of the vehicle. And the registration documents need to show 12 months immediately preceding the application signature date. And the title needs to show proof of ownership for the 2 years immediately preceding the application signature date. Again, this is for on-road for your old vehicles. And whether you're doing on-road or non-road, you will need to attach color photographs of the front side, right side, left side, rear side, engine, and engine data plate of the vehicle, equipment, or engine being replaced. These photographs also need to include tires or tracks. That helps us determine whether the old vehicle is still operable. Also, the engine data plate oftentimes includes needed information that we can use to confirm the vehicle details you listed back in section 6. Require refueling infrastructure attachment checklist. If you're doing refueling infrastructure, you'll need to remember, again, as we stated before, the site plan and the site property rights or ownership documentation. Finally, it's not included in this application, but there is a supplemental form for waivers of program requirements that will also be able to be downloaded separately. if you need a waiver from one of the program requirements required by this grant round, you will fill out the waiver form entirely and include with the application. And again, the signature is required. And again, any waiver forms will be considered on a case-by-case basis by the review team. Section 12 are the instructions for submitting your application. You can do it via email, and there's the email address right there. You can also submit it through TCEQ's FTPS server, and the instructions are there. If you prefer standard or express mail, we will also accept applications that way. And here are the addresses for that method. Again, if you would like to contact us with questions, this is the website. And this is the phone number you can call. I'm going to leave this up here for a few seconds so anyone can copy it down who needs it. And finally, I'm Jack Frink. Krista has been your host for most of this presentation. We are the grant specialists for the TextEvent program. You can reach us via email at this email address. And again, here one more time is the phone number. I'll leave this up for a few seconds, and then I am going to send this back to Krista. Thank you so much.